Okay, good afternoon and warm welcome to all those of you who have joined us from Europe, and good morning to all those who are joining us from Canada and the US in North America. My name is Toms ROSTOKS, and I'm Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Latvia. And I will be moderating this panel discussion on European strategic autonomy and the war in Ukraine. As we speak at the moment, the Russian president is probably announcing that Russia is annexing 4 regions of Ukraine. And I guess that provides a somewhat dramatic context for this panel discussion. However, that is not the reason why we were a little bit late with starting this discussion. So today is the day 2 of the Jean Monnet Network on Canada-EU Relations online workshop titled Facing the Russia Challenge, European and Canadian Perspectives. The Jean Monnet Network on EU-Canada Relations, the EU and Canada in Dialogue, is housed at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and the project supports a network involving Carleton University and the 4 European partner universities, University of Antwerp, Technical University Darmstadt, Technical University Munich, and University of Latvia. This workshop is an event that is organized in 3 parts with 5 panel discussions that take place today. And the first panel discussion took place yesterday. And there will be another panel discussion today after this one, which will deal with economic sanctions. And there will be 2 more panel discussions next Thursday. This panel discussion, however, is held in hybrid format. So the speakers are in Riga. Thank you for taking your time and coming to Riga. And we have some limited attendance here, and we have most of our attendance obviously online. So this panel discussion is titled The War in Ukraine and European Strategic Autonomy, and it's based on the book project that focuses on small states and European strategic autonomy. A little bit of self-promotion, I guess, is in order, because the edited volume will come out in 2023, and the title of the book is European Strategic Autonomy and Small States in the Shadow of Power. The book will be published by Routledge. I should also mention that the participants of this panel discussion are all contributors to the edited volume, and their interventions will be largely based on their contributions to the book project. But I also believe that participants will go beyond what they have written for the book project, because events on the ground are changing rapidly. We started working on the book project before Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine, but the book went into production about half a year after the war had started. Thus, we had the opportunity to assess the positions of small EU member states, and that is really the focus of the book, and it's also the focus of this panel, and that is also important piece of information for those of you who might be wondering why there are mostly panelists representing small states, and small states are the key focus of this research project. So currently we are witnessing how remarkably well the EU rose to the challenge that was posed by Russia and is still being posed as we speak to European security. The first panel discussion yesterday already noted that the European Commission was called Geopolitical Commission by its president, Ursula von der Leyen. This Geopolitical Commission has considerably reinforced EU capacity as a security actor that can act to defend the geopolitical interests of the EU, its member states and partner countries. And I'm sure that distinguished panelists will elaborate further on the EU willingness to become a security actor and to defend its interests vis-à-vis Russia. At the same time, though, more might be expected from the EU because the stakes are constantly raised in the ongoing conflict. And Russia is currently in the process of mobilizing hundreds of thousands of its citizens to support its war effort in Ukraine. NATO and EU also have been reluctant to provide some heavy equipment to Ukraine, such as tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. And that is these important capabilities have not been provided to Ukraine, despite the many voices in EU and NATO calling for delivery of Leopard tanks and Marder infantry fighting vehicles. Ukraine will badly need these assets in the campaign with the aim to liberate the temporarily occupied territories. Therefore, there's much to be done to face the Russian aggression and help Ukraine to reclaim its territories in the east and south. I would add that even though much attention is being paid to military supplies to Ukraine, political will and readiness to take measured risks will also be needed, as Ukraine will hopefully be taking back its territory. This process will be followed by constant threat of escalation from Moscow. There will be constant barrage of threats coming out of Russia. So EU's ability to get its act together will be as important as the material help to Ukraine. But then, of course, European strategic autonomy is not just about countering Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Strategic autonomy can be defined in many ways, but one of the more demanding definitions would be that strategic autonomy is about institutional capacity to independently plan and conduct military operations across the full spectrum of conflict, including in high-intensity military operations such as expeditionary warfare and territorial defense missions. Also, strategic autonomy is about the European Union being able to autonomously develop and produce the related defense capabilities with minimal or no assistance from the United States. So if the EU is serious about developing military and other capabilities that would allow it to achieve these important aims, it would require decades of high investment in high-end military capabilities. It would also require further defense integration among the member states and defense spending that goes well beyond 2% threshold that has become the benchmark within NATO. Also, it would require leadership and political will, not just to have those capabilities, but to use them when necessary. And with regard to the latter, the EU's track record is less than stellar. So, but before I give the floor to the distinguished speakers for their introductory remarks, I would like to mention again the usual disclaimer that the European support for the production of this project and this event does not constitute an endorsement of any particular positions. Our panelists are academics, and the views that they express are their own views. And another remark is that there will be a Q&A session after the round of introductory remarks, and you can use the questions and answers box to type in your questions. and then the speakers will address them at a later point. We will hopefully collect quite a few questions, and then we'll be addressing them at a later point. And after this rather lengthy introduction, I would like to give the floor to Giedrius ČESNAKAS, who is a political science and international relations professor at the General Jonas Žemaitis Military Academy of Lithuania, where he heads undergraduate and graduate programs in political science. He's an active researcher focusing on the issues of national security, international relations, and geopolitics. He's author of more than 20 academic articles and book chapters. His dissertation, Energy Resources in Russia's Foreign Policy Towards Belarus and Ukraine, was awarded the best research among young researchers by the Lithuanian Research Council in 2015. In addition, he participates in advisory groups on national security for various Lithuanian governmental institutions, and he's assistant editor of the academic journal Lithuanian Annual Strategic Review. His latest edited volume, which is forthcoming early next year, focuses on, guess what, European strategic autonomy and small states. Giedrius?
Okay, so dear colleagues, dear participants, it's a great pleasure to be invited into this event and be among friends who prepared this book and has plenty to say about strategic autonomy and security in Europe overall. So my question is, why do small EU member states want stronger cooperation in defense but without autonomy? And this might not be a surprising question, because let's face that most of the small states in European Union also are members of NATO, and only few of those states who are not members, the number is further decreasing, because Sweden and Finland announced their decisions to join NATO. For this is the question of how to increase security in Europe overall, or how EU could contribute to the security of small states. And I think the very good picture is presented by Lithuanian artist Rytis Daukantas in 2015, where the former head of the council is kind of in the Don Quixote position, searching for basically European army, or trying to invent European army when there is NATO, and moving away from NATO, so as we can see in the picture. So though the European strategic autonomy, the idea was presented basically most famously in 2016 in the shared vision, common action, Stronger Europe, the global strategy for the European Union's foreign and security policy. Instantly after the Brexit referendum, which sparked a lot of discussions, maybe there are relations to that and so on, but we can clearly see that this document was prepared before that, and it's just a coincidence of the events. However, when we look deeper into the idea of the strategic autonomy, we can clearly observe that this idea was already raised in 1948 in the Western European defense community ideas, but it was not successfully realized for a number of times. They were reinvigorated, the idea was reinvigorated, like a Fouché plan and other types, but in the end, the Western European dimension was incorporated into a bigger picture or greater alliance of NATO, and this way kind of subordinated to some extent of the domination of the United States. rather than creating independent center of power under the leadership of France. We see that basically until 1992, this idea was of common foreign policy, common defense policy was stagnant, but after 1992, when the European Union was established, this idea re-emerged in the and continuously reinvigorated, strengthened. And what we see in the Treaty of European Union, or so-called Lisbon Treaty, there is a famous Article 42.7, which basically is something similar to NATO's Article 5. However, to some extent, not all European countries are not very loud about this article, and they prefer the Article 5. I think the importance of the Article 42.7 also raises some significant, some interesting cases. You know, the common defense is basically somewhere further down the road rather than a priority. This is the situation. The European strategic autonomy, this term it became apparent that it's becoming to be used more frequently since 2011 in various documents, reports, and then in the European Parliament, and in 2015, European Council basically also focused on this this term. And we see, if we look at the usage of the term in the documents, we see a geometrical progression growth of that term since basically 2016 until 2021. The interesting that the evolution of European strategic autonomy was very rapid since 2016 until basically 2022 as a result of external, systemic, and other elements that will be discussed in the later. But in 2019, we had this case of COVID-19, which opened the European strategic autonomy as a new page for European strategic autonomy, and it moved it outside the defense sphere into economic cooperation sphere or industry sphere to create a more self-sufficient European Union, more independent on the supply chains, including the energy supply chains. So now in March 2022, in the strategic compass, which was basically, which should define where European strategic autonomy should head, uses the idea of autonomy only once, mentions this idea only once. So we see a kind of decline in the importance of this term. Now, what are the main objectives of the European strategic autonomy, as they said in the global strategy? First is to deter, respond, and protect itself, and also act outside EU borders. So what my colleague already mentioned, it's basically defense alliance ideas with the possibilities to act in the European neighborhood policy. These ideas, maybe the second one, are not so new, because basically since the wars in Balkans, European Union wanted to have a more significant role in its neighborhood, in the Kosovo crisis, in wars in Yugoslavia, as well as Libya and the Arab Spring. But in all these cases, it failed to be a core actor or a provider of security or more active role, and it always returned to the leadership of the United States, even the leadership from behind, as Barack Obama, US President, outlined. to acquire capabilities to act autonomously and in close cooperation with NATO. So the question is autonomy from whom or what? Basically, we have an answer to have autonomy from United States, because NATO in most cases is defined as the leadership of United States in defense cooperation to strengthen the European defense industry. And this is the sphere where basically European strategic autonomy was initially raised on the European Union level, with the focus on the developing of defense industry of Europeans, of course, with the primary interest of the great European powers who have significant capabilities of developing European defense industry, primarily France and Germany. For the rest of the states, this idea was not so important. So, since 2016, the very rapid development of European strategic autonomy was observed. First of all, European Defence Fund was established in order to have a greater cooperation, financial, in acquiring weapons or developing or financing the development of defense initiatives. Then military planning and conduct capability, basically establishing with the idea of establishing EU headquarters, military headquarters, primarily which now focus on the missions in Africa. However, their operational capabilities are still very questionable capabilities to act without the support of United States. Coordinated annual review of defense, or so-called CARD, in order to basically make to move different policies of European Union states on defense to closer in developing joint initiatives and basically having reports of how it's done or how successfully it's done. The most discussed, of course, element is permanent structured cooperation, or PESCO, which opened up possibilities to introduce projects between European member states to cooperate in different areas. This idea had to prepare European Union's basically strategic culture. However, most ideas were focused on the niche projects where different countries tried to, let's say, acquire European funds for the development of their particular areas. And here is an interesting case where Greece led most of the projects, presenting as a kind of hub for European defense initiatives and development of those initiatives. This is rather strange, so to speak. For example, Italy and Slovenia developed on creating artillery systems, which also raises the question when if one of the best artillery systems are, or the best artillery systems are in France or Germany, why we'll need other types of sources. So unfortunately, this PESCO didn't lead to the basically European strategic culture. European Peace Facility was also introduced as possibility to finance or provide funding for the African stabilization missions or countries which could acquire weapons or defense systems from European Union to provide funds for those systems or weapons. However, this came other way around, because it is most extensively used in the to support Ukraine from European Union funds, and with a lot less attention on Africa. So we see how proposed initiatives change in due course of the systemic pressures. And finally, European Intervention Initiative, though it is not closely integrated into European strategic autonomy, but in the outskirts, France thought about possibility to focus on it and to have some relations to increase the activity of its military in the missions outside the European Union, primarily Africa. Now, the factors defining fragility of the development of European strategic autonomy, first of all, it's strategic pressures, because through the history and until now, we see that basically the systemic pressures define how successfully strategic autonomy can move, whether it is rejected or when we can return. Those tensions in the relations between the United States and the some European Union countries basically invigorated strategic autonomy ideas. However, when we return to, let's say, more predictable relations between transatlantic allies, the importance of strategic autonomy decreased as well. We can see these fluctuations with the aggression of Russia. When the aggression was rather limited, we talked more about strategic autonomy. When it increased in 2022, this idea became less expressed. Now, strategic autonomy also is the outcome of national interests and their change, and basically each member state tries to have an input into strategic autonomy, or to, as I call, Europeanize its security or economic interests, basically put them on the European discussion table and move with that. So this affects the development of strategic autonomy. Then finally, it's domestic political changes and interests, and for a number of times we saw how changes in the after elections in European countries changed the focus on strategic autonomy. And for example, with the election in the initial the stages of strategic autonomy idea in the 60s, basically election of Charles de Gaulle as the president basically led to the scrap of this idea, then return back to this idea. So with the elections in Poland, we can also observe these elements when there were previous government that supported kind of bigger integration in defense. This government is rather not willing to support this integration, focusing on NATO. And so basically, why we have uncertainty about European strategic autonomy from the small states. Basically, NATO provides functioning security and defense. There might be alternatives, but pretty much most of small countries, small states we researched are pretty happy with the NATO as the core security provider. EU lack military capabilities. So this is the area where basically increases uncertainty of small states, that in case of the need of defense, European Union might not, or member states might not provide an substantial military support with the arms. And when we look in the Kiel Institute provided data about who and what supplies to Ukraine in its war with Russia, we clearly see the domination of United States and not the European Union countries. Then it's rational choice to cooperate with the United States. Why? US is the leading power in the world, and if you invest in the, in relations with the US, maybe it takes time, maybe it takes effort, but you have a clear answer. And when you deal with the European Union, you have to deal with the different structures of the European Union. Then you have to deal separately with the states of European Union, or the major states of European Union, and the outcome is still not very certain what you in the end will receive. So it's rational to put your efforts where it's the least it's the most cost effective, so to speak. Now, the duplication of responsibilities, we have a European Union HQ, but small states complain that basically they lack sufficient military personnel to supply NATO HQ, European HQ, and basically this is somehow a duplication. And so this is one of those challenges. And finally, national armies, by increasing cooperation between European armies, we do not create additional military forces, because we have national armies which put one of three flags, either national military army or NATO army or European Union army, so, or European, kind of missions army. So, but this does not increase the defense capabilities per se. So the one soldier or the one officer acts on three roles, and this does not bring any substantial additional defense capabilities. And the question is then, why European strategic autonomy, or the idea, is still alive? First, national interests and your open strategic autonomy, because states, small states, want to put their national interests in the strategic autonomy and to, get some kind of results, to get something out of that. And they do not focus on this common strategic culture. They still focus on their national strategic interests, and they try to put those interests at the forefront. And so this, as one of the researchers defined, it's a cacophony of the interests in building strategic autonomy. Now, the states respect national interests of France. France is the major player in the European defense system, and basically the most capable European military power. So you have to take into account its interests. Furthermore, the France is very important in financial sector, because it plays a major role with Germany in allocation of finances through different, agriculture, financing system in European. It basically dominates European bureaucracy and so on. So it's just important to keep this idea alive to some extent and not to directly oppose it from the strategic calculations. Now, the financial benefits, some countries who cooperate in PESCO projects or elsewhere, they can get resources, financial resources, to implement their national interests through European funding. So this is what also keeps European strategic autonomy afloat. And basically, European strategic autonomy is second choice security provider. You never know what might happen with NATO. So it's better to have reassurances from elsewhere. And finally, basically two issues to consider. First, security dependency on the United States. Yes, we are small states dependent on security, on US provision of security, but the US security orientation will change in the future. Of course, it for a number of times mentioned that it will focus on Indo-Pacific region, so it cannot keep attention everywhere at the same time. We'll see what will happen with attention on Europe. The second point is that relative power of United States will decline as other powers continue to rise. So we will also need to think about some extent alternatives. And third, and probably the one of the best arguments for keeping European strategic autonomy, is the high dependency of security of Europe on US electoral process. We don't know who will be elected the next president of the United States. Thank God we still in the United States have this institutional memory in Pentagon, in State Department, but this memory also changes in due time. And the second point, which also has four elements, it's basically that European strategic autonomy or some European policies are declarative rather than substantial. For example, the European Union focuses on declarative politics, like we see problems in this green course. We have now shutdowns of supply of gas and oils, but we are not prepared to have this green energy, despite that we talked for a long time about it. We talk about bringing or building military capabilities, tanks, planes, but they are nowhere near in the future to be seen. So a lot of declarations, not so much actions. Does not substantially increase defense funding. We see that we had this magic words of basically being smarter defense, or or basically pooling the resources, but you need to have resources which can be pooled. And you know, being smart, and nevertheless, how smart you can be. If you need tank, you need a tank, and so this is where actual increase in budgets is necessary, and remaining on the same budgets will not significantly increase the defense capabilities. ESA remains a project of great EU powers benefiting for their defense sectors, primarily France, to some extent Germany, and others. And basically, there is no belief in EU military capabilities. Unfortunately, if you ask most of the panelists in here from Belgium, from Estonia, Lithuania, or even Hungary, which also contributed to our book, or even Greece, they prefer to have United States as a core defender. And in case of Greece, the European strategic autonomy is maybe to some extent more acceptable to them rather than the rest, because they have these tensions with the Turkey, and Turkey is a NATO member, so they want to have this alternative to some extent. So after this brief review, I thank you for attention.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all those people who devoted a considerable time to organize this panel. At the time when I was invited to write a contribution about Belgium's stance toward European strategic autonomy, few people would have imagined that the growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine would eventually result in the ground invasion of the Ukrainian territory. The fact remains that we have witnessed for the first time since the Second World War to a deliberate attack of European states by another states. As of February this year, I think that until they had been a lot of everything that until then had been either pure political intention or conceptual debate suddenly collided with the strategic reality. History issued an unprecedented wake-up call for Europe. And such a concept as strategic autonomy is now approached from a completely different angle. For Belgium, the question of European strategic autonomy stems from the recognition of an obvious fact. The country does not have sufficient political, economic, and military support to operate alone on the international scene. However, the country has never been comfortable with the concept of strategic autonomy, as its neighbors have conceived it. I mean, a concept aimed at providing the nations with a freedom of action against its adversaries or opponents. Moreover, at the domestic level, the permanent search for balanced political solutions and compromises in order to manage cross-cutting cleavages, even in the field of foreign policy, thus often constituted an obstacle to the expression of a coherent policy in Belgium. Last but not least, given the country's institutional instability, the concept of strategic autonomy has never had a real echo among the political and military leadership. For all these reasons, strategic autonomy has to be developed according to Belgium in a multilateral and very balanced approach. In Belgium's view, a strong link exists between strategic autonomy, multilateralism, and interdependences. This is truly a very structural element of Belgian's foreign policy that should not be neglected. The temptation toward multilateralism does not only find its source in a idealistic aspiration, but also in a realistic approach of international relations that stems from the geopolitical context in which the country had to evolve throughout its history. However, this does not mean that Belgium has always delivered the required efforts to favor the emergence of a European strategic autonomy. Since the Cold War, the prospect of the emergence of a European defense based on ever more advanced integrations of military capabilities has long been considered as a solution for the country to reduce its defense expenditures. It's only recently that the political elites realize that although it is time to spend better in defense, it is also mandatory to spend more on defense. Things are about to change. In its general policy notes of November 2020, the Ministry of Defense clearly mentions that it will favor European strategic autonomy. Moreover, the general policy notes suggest that Belgium will pursue and strengthen its commitment to an effective European defense. It mentions also that Europe's strategic autonomy requires a military intervention capability and a solid industrial base. In this context, the Ministry of Defense will continue to invest in order to solve European capability gaps and will continue to embed its capabilities with privileged European partners. This will must be achieved through concrete decisions. At a budgetary level, the strategy vision for defense foresees, for example, a budgetary trajectory that reflects a certain alignment with the average defense expenditures of the non-nuclear European countries members of NATO. Moreover, Belgium's defense efforts should reach 1.24% of GDP by 2024. However, for diverse reasons, many uncertainties weigh on the feasibility of these objectives. On the collaborative side, Belgium has been implicated in many cooperation frameworks with the Dutch Navy, but also with the French Naval Group, within the EU or NATO. On the industrial front, Belgium is trying to catch up in the defense sector, and the recently adopted STAR plan is intended to ensure a better coordination between the Ministry of Defense, the armed forces, academic centers of excellence, and the country's leading edge industry. As far as more immediate military capabilities are concerned, the war in Ukraine has comforted Belgium's choice in favor of the acquisition of the F-35 in replacement of its aging F-16. Such a decision nevertheless raises doubts about the future of Belgium's involvement in European capacity development projects at a time when events in Eastern Europe call for urgent decisions. Whether these endeavors will better serve NATO or the EU is not a discussed question, as European defense cooperation in Belgium is envisaged to contribute to NATO commitment. Belgium's efforts toward greater European strategic autonomy never erased the country's commitment resulting from its allied status. NATO is and will remain the cornerstone of European security, according to Belgium's officials. To conclude, Belgium stands toward European strategic autonomy has long depended on multiple factors that were not only determined by international relations or world systemic imperatives. Domestic politics have repeatedly influenced decisive choice regarding military issues. Notwithstanding this consideration, Belgium has traditionally figured as one of the most resolute advocates of European cooperation in the field of defense. Yet, such a European activism sometimes suffers from realpolitik, especially regarding political choice that must be made about critical capabilities. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has led Belgium to fundamentally revise its approach to European defense. However, and because critical investment on defense require 20 to 30 years before resulting into disposable capabilities, especially when those investment takes place within multinational frameworks, one could say that Belgium's recent decision will not give immediate results. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you for a kind introduction. So you have a great talent for introducing all the researchers, making them feel good. I will actually not go to my book chapter because it's almost a little bit recent history book in that sense, that what happened before. Instead of that, I will go to the challenges which are in front of us in the last 220 days or a bit more. And also resonances and responses from Estonian side. So I will start with that. To have a kind of strategic response, we need to understand what is Putin's strategy and what is the starting point. And of course, here we start to disagree with the countries which are in longer distance and the ones who are next to Russia. So we have disagreed previously as well. So so there are countries which believe that that Russia can be still considered as acting in a way rationally, and that deterrence didn't work because it was too little of that. So the pain and gain were not balanced. So basically, if you can find a way to have more pain, Russia might be deterred. There are other group which believes that Putin and his closest comrades, Medvedev and Rogozin, have lost their mind collectively somehow and need a doctor, and we have hardly anything to do against that. So basically, just try to react and respond to their ever-growing escalation, and for them, the escalation is the only way to prolong the game. And the last option is that Putin is trying to play a madman, actually being rational, because he needs to punch over his weight. He's not a big man. I watched today the speech, and the doors were much higher than I was believing where he entered the room. But basically, he's using escalation of a madman model of escalation, and tries to convince the Western politicians to feel that they are guilty in all the way. They're guilty if they do something, and they are guilty if they don't do anything. So the start is that there is a partial success in that we have done a lot, but it's not that much European Union. And now I come to the practical aspects from Estonian side and as well as Ukrainian side. When you read the interviews about people who arrived to Ukraine, and they say, when I arrived, the British equipment instructors were here, the Polish equipment was here, the Turkish equipment was here, but not the German, not the French, not the Danish, and not to continue the whole list. So basically, I was working also that time last year. I was in Kiev, and I can concur on that the effort of Americans, Polish, and British saved Kiev, not the effort of European strategic autonomy or being clever and prepared. So we didn't save the day, but it doesn't say that we cannot be useful. that Europe cannot be useful. So what is quite visible and evident is that even those countries which are usually considered a bit pro-Russian, starting from Hungary and so on, are contributing, and they're welcome. So that is, I think, one of the European ways that we can do something. So what Estonia has done in that sense is, first we have learned the lesson that the strategic choice is London. If London agrees on that. You might have heard the news that the new Prime Minister has decided to remove half of the British troops from Estonia. So we might have a problem now. So we still have Washington with the big warships in the Baltic Sea now, and thousands of men there. We get less belief, or we get less visible confidence from the European countries. So this 220 days has made Europe look less important for Estonian people, for politicians. I forgot one country who also almost saved the day. It's South Korea. So what we can see at the moment, South Korea has agreed to replace most of the equipment donated to Ukraine. Not for free, but for money. So the Poland is buying, we are buying, I think many others will buy. So basically, even South Korea has contributed more to European security than many big countries in Europe. So Estonia has given away whatever we were able to give away. It's next to our wisdom to say that Russia is evil and will attack, which we said already many years ago. But we have given away howitzers, some buzzy vehicles, medical, mobile hospitals, and so on. In a way, believing that that will buy us time. By per person, by GDP, we are one of the leaders. So, and that has been the belief that to do something for Ukraine, you don't need to wait for Brussels, because most probably Scholz and Macron will waste another month. Let's say that way. It's even in Estonian newspapers, there's hardly a single day when you don't read something critical about French or German leaders. When to go to the Ukrainian case and to summarize the countries there, as I said, UK and US are seen as a kind of with a similar strategic approach to keep Ukraine alive and to keep the conflict very costly for Russia, to be sure that Russia is not ready for next conflict in upcoming years. However, we can see that there is no too much willingness to help Ukraine to win very fast or escalate fast, even with the transatlantic partners. With France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, we can see a lot of debates. We can see pro-Russian people. In Estonia, we call them silent agents. We have in the political system hundreds, if not thousands, of people who delay something for Russian interest. So basically, they're paid just to be slow, to debate, to ask, do we have a permission? What will happen if we do something? Oh, I have coronavirus, I have to go home. So those countries with a long tradition with the Russian partnership, their political systems are full of those people who delay. And that's why there is not much support or interest for an Estonian community if Germany will finally deliver a few old tanks from from 80s, let's say that way, to be politely. What has been maybe the bigger and the best surprise, Poland was considered as an anti-European country causing trouble for the region. Now Poland has turned to be the key neighbor who can convert all the other, whatever the others donate, Poland somehow transfers it to Ukraine, and it somehow works well. So Poland has taken a role of the regional leader in that sense. And if Polish army will go on as they plan, even Russia now considers that in conventional force, after 5 years, if Russia continues to lose and Poland continues to buy new weapons, Polish army will be matched for Russia. Even the Russians say that. So that has been a big change, and As you can see, we're talking about countries, so that has been the change. The media talks very little, and people talk very little about European Union in that game. Maybe it's in next panel about sanctions. There is something where you can see the EU, but I can also say a few words about sanctions as I'm not in that panel. The gas and oil sanctions are the most stupid way to implement if you want to punish Putin. If you cut surplus from the market, of course, the prices will go up and Putin makes even more money. What was necessary to do is to push more capabilities to the market. If you have plus 10% of oil or gas in the market, you don't need to sanction Putin, he just gets less money. If you can push you can remember the oil price was very low a couple of years ago because oversupply. So it has been interesting who is thinking out those solutions and who is testing them and why the sanctions don't work as quickly as they could have been working. But it's about next panel. I think you will go through that. To conclude, what we can say that the Western and especially European measures have been ineffective. Putin still has some cards in his pockets, and he's still able to escalate. Europe has also, I think, been weakest in propaganda war towards Russian audience. So we were very confident about things which did not happen. So and Putin is still there because he controls the Russian audience, and now he has kind of also succeeded to close the media space. So you might know that you cannot from here access some Russian news sources. In Russia, it's even worse. So basically, we have lost the channels. We cannot inform the Russian people anymore because they're blocked and they don't get our message. So that was lost, and that is now the question how to get it back. And we also need more media effort and efficiency to change the situation. Second, to have some kind of result, we need to try to define what we see as a victory. We don't have any the strategy needs to have a definition. So what do we want? And I think that is something what we should really put effort in every single event. To say, okay, let's see the current situation, what we can achieve with existing resources, what we can consider as a victory. I'm not proposing for any clear definitions here, but I just encourage you to raise the topic as often as possible. And third, we need to take initiative. We still play so slowly that even Russia suffering some losses. Estonia is approximately 100 times smaller than Russia. So if Russia loses 500 soldiers in a day, it's per Estonian population, it's 5 in a day. It's not that big war. So in Latvian case, it's 10 in a day. Not much. So if we really would like to get something, the numbers really need to get growing faster. Ukrainian war, if we believe the Ukrainian sources, around 60,000 Russians killed, it's still twice less than in winter war against Finland of Soviet Union. So it's very slow, and it allows Russia to compensate. We need to take initiative in a way that Russians will not have time to compensate, if we believe in that strategy. That's again now the question, what strategy we will implement. And if we are about just keep it slow, and we believe that the best strategy is to let Russia to weaken itself and hope until the sanctions will come, then of course winter is coming for us and for them, and we don't know for whom it will be more complicated. So some damage control, I think, is also needed to understand what can we allow, because as I said before, Putin controls his society quite well at the moment, and if gas and electricity prices are growing, we will have some unrest as well. It's not only his problem. So to conclude, we need clear definition of victory, we need initiative, and we need to get more action in the fields. It sounds badly, but in this way, it will take very long time. Thank you.
First of all, I wanted to thank organizers for having me here. It's a great pleasure addressing the audience and presenting at such a very interesting and relevant research panel. And I am also happy being together with this great group who was working on European strategic autonomy. And that work wasn't easy because we were writing our papers when the war started, and the writing of the papers was like taking place during the war. So everything was changing. The world was, kind of clashing, and European security environment was gravely deteriorated. So we had to take a look how European Union will react and how the region will adapt. So I think that the book itself is really very relevant, but it was quite challenging for us, scholars to dwell upon the topic. So talking about European strategic autonomy, and writing for me on strategic autonomy wasn't the very comfortable topic, because I'm more kind of focused on transatlantic security, on NATO. So I really appreciated I had a pleasure taking new topic and looking from different angle to European security. So what I've learned about strategic autonomy as such, that it has, I would say, two sides. It has a kind of strengths and weaknesses. The weak point, the weak side is its liquidity and fragmentation. And I'm calling it as European strategic autonomy is like a chameleon, it is changing the shape, changing the color all the time, and changing the material itself. So it's like all the time changing. So it is challenge, but at the same time and strength, I would say. So from the very beginning, when I started thinking about strategic autonomy, I saw it as an absolutely empty idea, which was thrown at the states, and they have EU states, and they have to fill it in with the content. And this content was really very, very different, and it is hard to square the circle and to see the direction where it is heading to. And I think this war in Ukraine helped European Union to focus, helped to clarify, especially in defense domain, where they're heading to and what we will get, what they can get. Of course, there are challenges, plenty of challenges, and all the speakers who spoke before me, they were mentioning and referencing those challenges. And we know it's transatlantic link, how European Union and NATO is cooperating, how they can put together their efforts, to increase the security, Euro-Atlantic security, European security, how include the transatlantic partners. And so we have Canadian organizers of this event. So it's US and Canada, transatlantic allies, and cooperation, and because they have a role, and they have very, very important role for transatlantic security. So the region is really kind of the same region, and we have our common security area. So we have to think about it. So talking about those strengths and weaknesses of the strategic autonomy. So I see this liquidity and fragmentation, namely numerous initiatives. There is no clear definition of autonomy, so it is flexible, and also broad spectrum of issues. And this spectrum of issues is not getting narrower, it is getting broader. Talking about positive side, adaptability. So you can choose the direction, and you can use the tools when they're needed. So example is European Peace Facility and war in Ukraine. So European Union already had the funds, had the tools, and they can provide this financial assistance to Ukraine. So that's everything. I think this adaptability is really very, very strong part of the European security strategic autonomy. when it comes to Russia's war in Ukraine, so I would say that indeed it is a great challenge for European Union itself, and it is interesting that strategic compass, European strategic compass, was issued during the war, and it is a very interesting and meaningful document highlighting the major elements, the most important elements for European security strategy, and providing a forward-leaning approach and defining Russia as a threat to European Union. Also, as I said, European Union managed to put some funds and to assist Ukraine with the military means. At the same time, they started focusing on defense, strengthened the focus on defense procurement industry, new technologies. So European Union states, they recognized that the need to restore, replenish resources, and that were provided as assistance to Ukraine against the backdrop of war, Russia's against Ukraine. So now when it comes to Lithuania's position and Lithuania's priorities with regards to European security and defense, and Lithuania's attitude towards the strategic autonomy, I would say that the approach of Lithuania towards the strategic autonomy is not even. From one side, and at the very beginning, 2016, 17, they were very, I would say, careful and not very optimistic because of the very meaning, emptiness and liquidity, and also what does it mean autonomy? From whom we should be autonomous? And if it is our closest allies, United States, transatlantic partners, so why we have to be autonomous from them? Because our security depends on them. So we have to talk to them. We have to include transatlantic partners into European initiatives, security initiatives. And that's the way, to get our security stronger. That's the way to cooperate in the area of security. So that was kind of critical approach from the very beginning. But later Lithuania is, I've noticed that it is balancing pragmatic and I would say normative approach. So pragmatic approach is looking for the practical applicability, some practical gains from the European security and defense initiatives. So a few examples can be military mobility initiative, which is very useful, and if it will be developed and started to be implemented in full, so it can help in a logistic way, logistics, and so European Union armies, forces to move freely within the European Union. So it's really very good, and also it contributes to the regional security, and in case of conflict or crisis, forces can move faster. So because now there are impediments for movement of forces. Also, there are certain projects as PESCO projects that are really very useful and flexible approach, but the challenge with PESCO projects that they are open to third parties, but still there are obstacles and some impediments for third parties to join, because there are all the parties have EU parties that are members of PESCO projects have to accept the third party, and at the same time it's not enough to have all the project members accepting. Also, the entire EU group has to agree that the third party joins PESCO project. So it's like all those technical administrative challenges exist with the domain of inclusion of third parties. So what else? Lithuania also highlights strategic responsibility. And strategic responsibility to prevent the EU from harmful technological industrial influences stemming from the rival states, including the autonomy related to energy policy and protection of supply chains. Supply chains, now we have case of Nord Stream. So I think this issue, this topic will come into the EU agenda as well. So it is natural. So Lithuania highlights that. Also, Lithuania is highlighting the capabilities. European Union has its challenges, and Giedrius mentioned that there is an intention to develop capabilities, but what is the goal for those capabilities? Those capabilities have to be responsible for defense of European territory. So they really are not there yet, and this a lot of years will have to pass till the moment and where the European Union will be at this be able to have the forces and have the forces prepared to defend territory. And then if they will have those forces, the question is how those forces are compatible and interoperable with NATO. So there's really plenty of questions here. Primary idea, the early idea was to have forces prepared to be deployed to out-of-air operations. So this kind of missions abroad, but European Union never spoke enough about defense of European Union territory. So that's an important moment here. So territorial defense is very important. And I think the final point would be going back to Giedrius' point about the United States, and I fully agree that actually what we learned from Russia's war against Ukraine, that European security and defense, the United States is like very important actor, and US resolve is the most critical here. And we have Balkans example, we have plenty of examples. Ukraine is a great example, and there was the recent article in Politico counting the numbers. So it's like a European Union spent a few, I don't know, depending on the countries, if we put together, so EU 2.5 billion and maybe more, but US numbers are hundreds times more. Yes, so it's like it's really, you cannot compare absolutely different numbers and different powers, different capabilities and political will. So that's really important moment, and I think European Union, by developing the strategic autonomy, focusing on this defense, they will have to address United States, transatlantic partners, and think about how to get them closer to European Union. So this is it, and thank you very much.